Whereas most people would be really happy to play against Saffron, for me it brings back harrowing memories of embarrassment.
Is this Timely just gain... Timely do nothing?
Living End. If you are ended, you will now be living, and if you're living, you will be now ended. And in certain situations, I'm sure we'll be very happy to trade the living for some of the dead. Case in point, I'm sure we'd all be over the moon if Justin Bieber would swap places with Elvis Presley. Or with how bad The Walking Dead has been recently, if some of the main characters would swap places with the zombies. The problem with real life applications of this is that funeral costs would bankrupt everybody. However, in the Magic world, we've got a reasonably priced deck that'll help you to reanimate corpses for your pleasure. I really don't want to know what's going on there. My name's Dan, and this is a deck I've rather inventively called Mono Red Living End. Mono Red Living End started out with what I assume was a troll post on a Facebook group. Whereas most people, myself included, were mocking this person because, quite frankly, we thought they were joking, it did get me thinking, there's Mono Blue Living End, why can't there be Mono Red Living End? After all, red does have some very powerful looting effects in Modern at the minute, and a deck that likes to discard cards as much as Living End could really use the utility of a Faithless Looting. Couple this with the fact that Karizev's expertise and Goblin Dark Dwellers are able to cast Living End for free, and we have the basis of a new Living End archetype. The beauty of Mono Red Living End is that it kind of acts like a Hollow One deck that has a Splinter Twin finish. By using 12 looting effects, we're able to consistently get out Hollow Ones early in the game and attack our opponent on one front, whilst also putting a whole bunch of creatures into our graveyard that we can flash back and win on the turn we cast Living End. We do this with Urabrask, which basically means if our opponent gets any creatures back, they will come back tapped. If we get any creatures back, they come back with haste, so we can swing for 20 points of damage in one turn. I guess I should start my deck tech with the looting effects. Faithless Looting is simply the best. Better than all the rest. Better than all the other looting effects in Modern. Whereas with most Faithless Looting decks, it does quite a good job for them. We think of Hollow One discarding those Flamewake Phoenixes to bring back later on. It does even more in Mono Red Living End, because it actually sets up a one-turn combo kill later in the game. It cycles through our library very fast, it gets the Hollow One out as quickly as possible. We also run 4 Tormenting Voice and 4 Insolent Neonates. We did consider a Cathartic Reunion over Tormenting Voice. The issue was that you didn't always have 2 cards in your hand you wanted to discard, so often Cathartic Reunion wasn't castable, and Tormenting Voice does a good enough job of actually setting up for your Living End combo later on. You're cycling 2 cards through your deck and you get to keep them, you don't have to discard them. It's not as good as setting up a Hollow One like a Faithless Looting by itself, but when combined with Street Wraiths and Desert Ceradons, it's quite easy to get 2 or 3 cards discarded in one turn. Our last looting effect is an Insolent Neonate. Now this card has been surprisingly versatile. You can play this on turn 1 instead of a Faithless Looting, and then on turn 2 you can Faithless Looting plus Insolent Neonate to get your Hollow Ones for 0 mana. And whereas other discard outlets like the Faithless Looting and the Tormenting Voices don't return a creature later on, the Insolent Neonate does return an extra creature when you Living End combo later in the game. It's also worth noting that Insolent Neonate goes incredibly well with our sideboard plan. More on that later. Next up, the creatures we're looking to discard. First up, we've got 4 Desert Ceradons and 4 Street Wraiths, which we're more than happy to cycle by themselves. It's an extra discard outlet for Hollow One to reduce the cost of that, and it's also something that you can easily pitch to a Tormenting Voice or a Faithless Looting. However, the 2 of creature we really want to be discarding is Urabrask. When Urabrask gets reanimated with Living End later on in the game, it basically makes all of your creatures swing that turn, and it returns all of your opponent's creatures tapped, so they won't be able to block. It does basically mean we have a combo kill if set up properly. We can also discard our Hollow Ones if we want to, say we're setting up for a Living End that we know we're going to be casting within the next turn or 2, but usually Hollow One is something you want to be holding back and putting onto the battlefield for something that your opponents have to deal with. And that is the beauty of this version of Living End. Whereas you're putting out Hollow Ones which your opponents have to deal with, you're constantly setting up your graveyard for your combo kill. To cast our Living Ends, we have 3 Karizev's Expertise and a 1-off Goblin Dark Dwellers. We're only on 1 Dark Dwellers because it is still 5 mana to cast this thing, and we're only running 18 lands plus 2 Simian Spirit Guides in our deck, and we don't really want to be waiting until turn 5 to realistically Living End, although it is possible it's there as an outlet if we do need to put Living Ends into our graveyard. Goblin Dark Dwellers is also quite a decent card to discard. A 4/4 with Menace is very good, and it also flashes back a Faithless Looting, a Lightning Bolt, a Tormenting Voice, basically meaning that you get extreme value even after your Living End, even if you can't win that turn. Karizev's Expertise is our most realistic Living End caster. Now the issue with using Karizev's Expertise is that if your opponent removes the creature you're targeting before it resolves, you never get to cast your Living End. However, the upside of Karizev's Expertise is that quite often, if we've got our Hollow Ones out, we can steal our opponent's biggest creature and get to cast, say, a Lightning Bolt for free and then attack them for lethal early in the game. We don't have to have the Living End to actually utilise Karizev's Expertise to its full potential. Our other utility spells are 4 Lightning Bolts, good burn to the face, good removal, 2 Blood Moons, obviously Blood Moon can steal games very easily in Modern, it's never going to disrupt our land base, and 2 Simian Spirit Guides, mainly to facilitate a turn 2 Blood Moon, but also an early Living End. However, the thing I love most about this deck is the transformational sideboard. We're going to take out all of our Living Ends and most of our Karizev's Expertise and bring in a completely different deck. After sideboarding, our opponents are almost certainly going to remove some amount of removal. They're also probably going to bring in a lot of graveyard hate. Our plan is to take the Living Ends out and bring young Pyromancers in. You will notice that our deck, whilst being a creature combo deck, doesn't actually run a huge amount of creatures, and the vast majority of those creatures are usually used as discard fodder to our non-creature spells anyway. So our transformational sideboard brings in young Pyromancers, it brings in Goblin Bushwhackers, and even some Lava Spikes to get some damage straight to our opponent's face, and while they're worrying about our graveyard, we're just going to be extremely aggressive and turn into some kind of weird young Pyromancer Hollow One tokens burn deck. We also have an Abrade for some artifact removal, 2 Anger of the Gods for those really aggressive creature decks like the Bridge from Below deck, and 2 Guttural Responses to deal with blue counterspells. Another great thing about this deck is that it's very budget. On MTGO you're looking at about 54 tickets, which is dirt cheap for a Modern deck, and in paper if you already own the Living Ends and the Blood Moons you're looking at about a $100 deck, which is, by Modern standards in paper, extremely cheap. So now we will go away, take a look at the games that I did play. I hope you guys enjoyed the deck tech and the games, and I will speak to you afterwards where I will have a wrap up and a sneak peek as to the deck I'm building for next week. Finally, just a quick reminder before we get into the games, down below I will have a link to the deck list. I'll also have timestamps so you guys can go to the exact point of the video you want, and while you're down there, leave me a comment, tell me what you guys think about the deck, what would you change, would you splash a second colour? Give me a subscribe, it really helped me out, and I'll be uploading some more videos soon, so you will get to know as soon as that video is uploaded. Our pretty decent opening hand poses us 2 questions. 1, how many Hollow Ones can we draw on turn 2? And 2, what the fuck happened to my Living End art? Our opponent opens with an Inspiring Vantage and just passes straight back to us. We go ahead and draw the second part of our Living End combo with the Karizev's Expertise. We pass back to our opponent, we're going to wait until next turn to cast our Faithless Looting into Hollow One. Our opponent bolts us on end step. Never saw that one coming. They play a Bloodstained Mire and pass straight back to us. It's good for us that we managed to avoid Eidolon of the Great Revel on turn 2. With the amount of cantrips in our deck, there's a very good chance that would have bruised us like a peach. Our hand is also shaping up pretty well. We're looking to get out multiple Hollow Ones this turn with a bit of luck. We've also got Desert Ceradons and the Living End combo should anything go wrong. We play a Mountain and play our Faithless Looting. We draw into more Faithless Lootings and a Simian Spirit Guide. We do go ahead and discard the Mountain and the Simian Spirit Guide. I think this might have been a mistake by me. I probably should have pitched the Desert Ceradon since we're going to be putting that into the graveyard at some point anyway, and the extra land would have been quite handy going into next turn. We go ahead and cast our second Faithless Looting of the turn. This means a Hollow One will be cast for free this turn, more like Hollow None. Am I right? We pitched the Desert Ceradon and an extra Lightning Bolt this turn. The Lightning Bolt would be quite handy to burn our opponent now and hopefully catch them off guard, but we really do need that extra Mountain for our Karizev's Expertise next turn. Our opponent fetches a basic Mountain on end step, and Cow charms our face to oblivion. Do you get it? Because Boris Charm has a cow on it? Yeah, bad joke. Moving on. Our opponent plays a Wooded Foothills, and yet again passes straight back to us. They must have a handful of just spells and no creatures. We draw ourselves a Goblin Dark Dwellers, which is a good discard outlet for Faithless Looting. If we do end up living ending with a Goblin Dark Dwellers in our graveyard, then the Dwellers can flash back a Lightning Bolt for free from our graveyard and get in 3 points of damage at our opponent. We attack with our Hollow Ones, getting 4 more points of damage, and then we go ahead and flash back the Faithless Looting from our graveyard. We could have also cast Karizev's Expertise this turn, but I think with a Lightning Bolt in our graveyard, a Goblin Dark Dwellers and a Lightning Bolt in hand, this is probably the fastest way to close out the game. We draw a land and another Faithless Looting. We keep the land and get rid of Dark Dwellers and Faithless Looting. This leaves us with Lightning Bolt plus Karizev's Expertise next turn. Our opponent Cow Charms us for a second time on end step, goes ahead and fetches with their Wooded Foothills, but gets a tapped Sacred Foundry, which has to be a good sign for us, because that means they have no 1-mana burn spells in hand. Our opponent suspends a Rift Bolt, which you would assume would be their draw for the turn, and passes straight back to us. We draw an Insolent Neonate, which is pretty much a dead draw at this point. We're not going to be able to use the mana to get that into the graveyard this turn. We're getting for 4 points of damage with Hollow One, Lightning Bolt our opponent, then cast our Karizev's Expertise. Hoping for the love of God our opponent isn't running a main deck Path to Exile. The Living End resolves, we get all of our creatures back from the graveyard, our Goblin Double D's flashes back the Lightning Bolt, deals 3 points of damage to our opponent's face. Our opponent casts Lightning Helix on end step, and with Rift Bolt on suspend, it's pretty unlikely that we're going to see another turn. We're hoping for a minor miracle where our opponent has no burn spells in hand, and with the sound of skulls being cracked, our hopes are all gone. So close. In sideboarding, I do go ahead and bring in the transitional sideboard. I think there's a very good chance my opponent's going to be bringing in Graveyard Hate, so I'd like to take out the Living End combo. I do feel there's a bit of risk with Young Pyromancers being very easy to remove with things like Lightning Bolt, but if my opponent's bolting my Young Pyromancers, I think I'm okay with that trade. Sideboarding is super easy here. We take out the Karizev's Expertise, the Living Ends, and the Street Wraiths. We start game 2 with a hand that has great potential. The urabrask is a bit pointless, but if we can draw discard outlets, we're going to be able to put down our Hollow One, plus just flood the board enough for Goblin Bushwhacker to just end the game in one foul swoop. Our opponent mulligans to 6, which is a great sign for us. We begin with a Mountain, hoping to pick off a Swift Spear or a Goblin Guide, and keep the board clear for young Wrong Weasley to come down turn 2. Our opponent plays a Goblin Guide, and we say GG's to the G-Man after he selflessly donates lands to our cause. We find ourselves a Tormenting Voice, which is a pretty decent draw, because it's going to help fuel our Hollow One, whilst also producing tokens from Young Pyromancer, assuming the Pyromancer survives next turn. Our opponent plays a second land, and then rather splendidly plays a Rest in Peace. The sideboard plan is working! We instantly draw into a Faithless Looting, which is the only downside of Rest in Peace. However, Faithless Looting does still fuel our Hollow One, whilst also producing tokens from Young Pyromancer. We discard the Urabrask and the Simian Spirit Guide, and then instantly use the Tormenting Voice to discard the other Tormenting Voice. This will make Hollow One cost Zippity Doodah, whilst hopefully we can find a few more to go along with it. We may have Zippity Doodah, but we don't have a Wonderful Day as we draw 2 Mountains, which are pretty much dead cards. However, with a Goblin Bushwhacker in our hand, we're perfectly set up next turn to get in for more than 15 points of damage. For now, our Pyromancer gets in for 2, and we pass back to our opponent, who plays one of the tamest Monetary Swift Spears you will ever see. They do get in with a Lava Spike, but a burn deck that's only dealt 3 points of damage by the end of turn 3 is not a very good burn deck. With our draw step, we find another land, and this is just mountain pressure on our hand. Sorry for that awful joke right there. However, we do kick a Goblin Bushwhacker, and we're able to swing at our opponent for an absurd amount of damage. I'm sure my opponent is thinking, is this the same fucking deck? Our opponent blocks the Young Pyromancer with the Monetary Swift Spear, they trade, and our opponent takes 11 points of damage with Lethal on board next turn. Our opponent passes straight through their turn, presumably only having burn spells in hand, and we get fortunate enough to draw a second Goblin Bushwhacker, so now even if our opponent has removal, we probably have Lethal on board. Our opponent fires a Lightning Helix at our face, but that's nowhere near good enough as we're swinging in for 13 points of damage. G to the G, W to the P, RIP was useless. We made no changes during sideboarding. I still feel like the Young Pyromancer plan is probably better than the Living End plan in the burn matchup. We just don't have enough time to be putting stuff in our graveyard, especially when they could potentially have Rest in Peace in hand. We keep a reasonably powerful hand with turn 1 Insolent Neonate into Faithless Looting on turn 2. Our opponent plays double Gs again, it swings in and it reveals another Hollow One on top. So now we're looking at 2 Hollow Ones on turn 2. We put down our Insolent Neonate. We have absolutely no intention of blocking. If the Insolent Neonate stays alive next turn, we can put down 2 Hollow Ones for 0 mana. Our opponent plays an Arid Mesa and fetches a basic, then they play Monetary Swift Spear, and all of a sudden our Hollow One hand is looking very, very, very strong. The Goblin Guide rather kindly reveals a Mountain to us. Our opponent Lightning Bolts us, we take a grand total of 7 damage. We draw ourselves a Lava Spike, which might help us steal this game. we're going for a point of damage with Insolent Neonate, we then discard the urabrask and draw another card. We end up drawing a Tormenting Voice, which we end up pitching along with a land to the Faithless Looting. We do find ourselves a Blood Moon, which could be really useful in this matchup where we have Hollow Ones, as we're able to take our opponent off of things like Deflecting Palm, Lightning Helixes, and Boros Charms later on in the game. We Lava Spike our opponent and put them down to 15. We're hoping our opponent doesn't have too many burn spells in hand this turn. When they tap out for a Rest in Peace, we're pretty much thinking the game might be over. Yet again, our sideboard strategy has basically won us the game. Our opponent doesn't attack and just passes straight back to us. We top deck a Young Pyromancer, which leaves us with 2 Rons, 1 Moon, which sounds like one awful pornographic movie. We get in with our Hollow Ones, and our opponent chump blocks one with a Monetary Swift Spear. We put down our Blood Moon. I do think Blood Moon is underappreciated against Burn. If you can turn off all of their Lightning Helixes, Deflecting Palms, Boros Charms, it actually goes quite a long way. Our opponent does nothing more than play an Eidolon of the Great Revel, and passes back to us. We find ourselves a Lava Spike, which means that if my opponent doesn't block this turn, they are dead. We're swinging in for 8, and rather surprisingly, my opponent only blocks with a Goblin Guide. I was fully expecting to see a double block on one of the Hollow Ones to at least get one of them off the table. We go ahead and cast our Lava Spike, we take 2 points of damage for the privilege, but now we realise that there's literally no way our opponent can win the game. They get to cast one spell, and the second one would kill them. Our opponent untaps and quickly concedes. Rest in peace for the win. We can game 1 with plenty of good cycling and discard effects in our hand. This hand could go wrong, but if we draw the right pieces it could be insanely powerful. Also, why the fuck do we still have no living end art? What is going on, Modo? Is this just like zombie racism or something, like Zaysism? Zombieism? Whatever it is, give me my freaking living end art back. Our opponent leads on Wooded Foothills, we draw a Desert Celadon for our turn, we play a mountain, and we pass to our opponent, who cracks the Wooded Foothills and finds a Breeding Pool. Our opponent untaps, plays an Impulse Nexus, followed by a Blighted Agent. I think there's a slight chance we might be playing against Infect. Infect is actually quite a rough matchup for Living End in general anyway, but I get the funniest feeling that this matchup might be even worse. They're just too fast. We cycle our Desert Celadon and end step to find another mountain. We untap and find ourselves a nice little Hollow One on top of our deck. The good news for us here is that we are able to get it out this turn because we have Street Wraith and Desert Celadon, which will reduce the Hollow One's cost to 1. The downside is, if we're doing this, our opponent can just kill us next turn. We cycle a Street Wraith and find a Kerizev's Expertise, meaning that next turn, if we do survive, we have a chance of being able to wipe the board. We cycle our Desert Celadon to find an Insolent Neonate, which is essentially free since we were going to pay that 1 mana for Hollow One anyway. If we play our Insolent Neonate and discard a card straight away, the Hollow One costs 0. We discard a Tormenting Voice to the Insolent Neonate, so we're probably not going to be able to cast that this turn, and unfortunately, on top is a Lightning Bolt, and we no longer have the mana to bolt the Blighted Agent. However, we do get to still play our Hollow One for free, so with any luck, our opponent might not be able to slaughter us this turn. Our opponent plays a Wooded Foothills, fetches, plays Might of Orkrosa, and gets in for 5, and passes back to us. We've managed to survive the turn, but in reality we're probably going to be dead next turn even if we do board wipe, because they do have the Inkmoth Nexus. We draw a mountain, so we just go ahead and get in for 4 points of damage with Hollow One. We play Kerizev's Expertise, but unfortunately, because I'm a fucking moron and don't know how Infect works apparently, I target my opponent's creature rather than my own. Our opponent untaps and uses Might of Orkrosa to get in the last 5 points of damage and win what was quite an easy game for them. Fuck you, Infect. In sideboarding, we do decide to go down the Living End combo and bring in the more reliable Young Pyromancer strategy. This is mainly because our opponent doesn't have much in the way of removal, and also those tokens could potentially block a Glistener Elf or a Noble Hierarch at a push. I decided not to bring in the guttural responses. I'm not too bothered about Spell Pierce as anything my opponent could counter, and I don't feel like being reactive is a way we're going to win this game. We do keep a reasonably decent opening hand. With 2 Faithless Lootings and an Insolent Neonate, there's every chance we can maybe get ourselves into Hollow One on turn 2. Our opponent starts with an Inkmoth Nexus, so we're hoping that is pretty much the only Infect creature in hand. We draw another mountain, which is both good and bad. It is another thing we can just discard with Faithless Looting or the Insolent Neonates, but obviously we would much rather be drawing stuff like Hollow Ones or Young Pyromancers. We get in for a point of damage, and then we use our Faithless Looting first. We draw 2 more lands, so we're getting pretty absurdly mana flooded. The good thing is at least we can discard those 2 to Faithless Looting. We use our second Faithless Looting, and we're kind of hoping for Hollow Ones here. We don't find them, but on the plus side we do find Pyromancers, so there's every chance we might be able to flood the board and win this game. We discard a Simian Spirit Guide and a Desert Celadon, and pass back to our opponent. They play a Breeding Pool, and spend their entire turn just dealing 1 point of infect damage. That could be good for us. We kind of need our opponent just to stumble a little way, and then we might be able to sneak this game from them. We draw a Lava Spike for our turn, which goes really well with the Young Pyromancer. It's going to give us an extra elemental token. Coupled that with the Goblin Bushwhacker next turn, and 3 points of damage from the Lava Spike, we might have a chance of actually winning this game if our opponent just stumbles a little bit more. In fact, if our opponent doesn't kill us this turn, and we do find a non-creature spell off the top, we can probably win the game next turn. However, our dreams of a sneaky win are pummeled into the ground when the Infect player plays a Might of Old Crozer, 2 mutagenic growths, and a forest to take the game. Oh, Infect, even saying your name makes me feel disgusting. I think I'm going to beep the word Infect out of this video in editing. We begin game 1 with what is a pretty decent starting hand, but more importantly, we have the Living End art back. Look at this sexy zombie fella. We're going to be able to cycle through our deck pretty briskly with this current hand, so if we can draw the right cards like Hollow Ones and our Living End combo pieces, we've got a very good chance of doing something very special. Our opponent starts with a basic Snow Mountain. This is basically Skred or Skred Dragons. Our only real worry with this matchup is do they have Relic of Progenitus? Progeniti? What's the plural of Relic of Progenitus? If they have those in their hand, it makes our Living End combo very, very, very hard. We draw a Street Wraith for our turn. I decide to not play the Instant Leanate. The reason being is because I really want to get the discard outlet off of this card. I really want to cycle my way through the deck as much as we possibly can. And with my opponent having up 1 mountain, I don't want to give them the opportunity to just get a Lightning Bolt or a Skred for free. Our opponent just plays another basic mountain and passes back to us. We cycle the Desert Celadon on end step and find a very nice Hollow One on top of our library. We then untap and find the second part of our Living End combo. And just when I thought our draw couldn't have gone much more perfectly, we play our Faithless Looting and find an Urabrask and a Street Wraith. We're now technically on for a turn 3 kill with mono red Living End. We discard the Urabrask and a Street Wraith to the Faithless Looting. We go ahead, we cycle our other Street Wraith to maximise the cost reduction on Hollow One. Yet again, it's become Hollow None, and that might just be my word of the day, Hollow None. We draw into a Simian Spirit Guide, which is actually quite a good draw, because now we can play our Insolent Neonate, and we can potentially, if we draw a land, discard the Simian Spirit Guide to improve our graveyard. We cast our Hollow None, put down our Insolent Neonate, and pass to our opponent. Our opponent plays a Scrying Sheets, and uses Draconic Roar and a Lightning Bolt to kill our Hollow One. This could not be going any better. We find ourselves another Living End off the top. That kind of sucks. We really wanted to put that Simian Spirit Guide in the graveyard, but we're still just going to win this turn, so I guess it doesn't really matter. We carry Zev's Expertise on the stack. We find, as per usual with this deck, we have a Reader. Most people probably don't even remember Carry Zev's Expertise outside of Living End players. Our Living End resolves, and we get a measly 20 power with haste on the board. I think that's what we call in the business a goddamn motherfucking really good draw. We do decide to take out the Living End combo and bring in the Cyborg Young Pyromancers, fully expecting my opponent to have a board full of graveyard hate, which they will actually think is really good. However, this time we do keep in one Carry Zev's Expertise. This is because my opponent usually is going to be playing a dragon turns 4, 5 and 6, and would like to maybe steal a dragon later on in the game and win with that. We begin game 2 with a pretty decent opening hand. We have the Young Pyromancer, we have bolts, we have a Street Wraith to cycle through our deck. There is a bit of a danger with Young Pyromancer that they could have a Skred or a Lightning Bolt, but I'm fully banking on my opponent playing lots of graveyard hate. Speaking of which, my opponent starts with a Snow-Covered Mountain, followed by a Relic of Progenitus. That was my attempt at some kind of cackling witch. I think it went pretty badly. We draw a Faithless Looting for the turn, which is not a bad draw. We actually exile a Simian Spirit Guide in the hope of getting down a turn 1 Young Pyromancer, because next turn we can Lightning Bolt and Faithless Looting, and even if they do bolt the Young Pyromancer after that, it's already produced 2 tokens. Our opponent plays another mountain and plays a Magma Spray. Son of a bitch. Unfortunately, we find another mountain off the top. We cycle our Street Wraith and find yet another mountain. The good news about that though is that our Faithless Lootings are able to shuffle those away, so we can loot for our library a bit faster than most other decks. Our opponent makes us shuffle away the Street Wraith in response, and from our Faithless Looting we do find a Lava Spike and a Lightning Bolt. Not bad. We get really fortunate in that our opponent hasn't found a third land. We need to try and end this game as quickly as possible before they get to that fourth land and start playing some big creatures. We find an Insolent Neonate, which at the very least is 1 damage per turn. And with a Faithless Looting in our graveyard, we should be able to avoid really bad draws for a while. We also go ahead and Lava Spike since we're very likely to be using our Faithless Looting next turn. Still no third land for our opponent, and it's looking really good for us at this point. We just need to keep the pressure on. Things are made even better for us when we top deck a hollow one. We're getting for a point of damage with the Insolent Neonate, intending to sacrifice it after combat, and combined with a Faithless Looting, turn the Insolent Neonate into a hollow one. Our opponent goes ahead and tries to Lightning Bolt the Insolent Neonate, which is the perfect result for us. Because now not only is our opponent struggling with lands, they're also giving up a Lightning Bolt, and that's also a Lightning Bolt that isn't hitting our hollow one. We find a land with the Insolent Neonate, which is perfectly fine because we can discard that as part of our Faithless Looting. Though we didn't have the best Faithless Looting ever, we do find a Karizev's Expertise, which we can then use to hopefully steal one of our opponent's creatures later on in the game. Out of what I assumed was desperation, our opponent cracked their relic to exile the graveyards in hunt for another land. However, it looks like they drew a Relic of Progenitus for their turn. Our transformational sideboard really has been very impressive. Our opponents are just bringing in loads of graveyard hate while we have no graveyard cards left in our library. We find an Insolent Neonate off the top, which isn't as bad a draw as it may seem. We're going to be swinging for 4 points of damage this turn, and now with the Insolent Neonate that's 5 damage a turn, which is a 2-turn clock. Our opponent cracks a relic again in desperate need of that third land, which yet again they don't find. Our opponent has 7 cards in hand, so we really do want to end the game as quickly as possible. And with a top deck Goblin Bushwhacker, plus the Karizev's Expertise to steal one of their creatures if anything really goes wrong, I really don't see us losing this match from this point. Our opponent has a second Magma Spray. I don't really understand this sideboard strategy from my opponent. They saw plenty of high toughness creatures in game 1, so to really exile one creature they're going to have to 2-for-1 themselves. It really paid off for them here, but most importantly we're still getting in for 7 points of damage, which puts our opponent into bolt range. Our opponent untaps and finally finds their third land. The question now is, can they actually deal with the hollow one? And even if they can, are we going to top deck our Lightning Bolt or Lava Spike? And as per usual, because this game we've been top decking like an absolute beast, we do find the bolt off the top. Because I'm an arsehole, I tried to play with my food first and make it so my opponent thinks they've got a glimmer of hope, but we know that there's no way they can win this game now. We attack with a Hollow One and Goblin Bushwhacker, hoping that our opponent will think they've got some kind of chance if they just kill the Hollow One. The opponent Draconic Roars and then combines it with a Skred to attempt to kill the Hollow One, to which we Lightning Bolt in response, with full troll face on. We begin game 1 with the combo in hand plus some lands, some looting effects, but we're hoping to hit creatures off the top for a decent living end in the mid game. This could go wrong, but I think it's good enough to keep. We also find that our opening hand may have told us the backstory of how Living End Guy died. In true Cluedo fashion, it was Karizev in the mountain with a giant fucking sword. Then Shang Tsung from Mortal Kombat randomly turned up, reanimated what turned out to be Sarkhan into the Living End corpse. Sarkhan is Living End Guy confirmed. We play Mountain and say go. Our opponent plays the Sea Chrome Coast, followed by a Champion of the Parish. Looks like we're going to finally have a top tier challenge for our Living End deck. We draw a Giant Orangutan, which at least gives us the mana for Karizev's Expertise when we're ready. We Tormenting Voice discarding a Street Wraith. I think in retrospect I should have discarded one of the Karizev's Expertise. That's one less card we're going to see, and we don't need excess copies of Karizev's. We find a Lightning Bolt and a Mountain. This is really good for us. The extra Mountain will go quite a long way, and the Lightning Bolt being able to pick off Meddling Mage could be a big deal. Our opponent plays a Horizon Canopy and a Thales Lieutenant. I did consider using a Lightning Bolt with the Simian Spirit Guide, but I think that has to be reserved for a Meddling Mage or an actual Thalia. Our opponent gets in for 3, which we're reasonably happy to take, considering the hand we have. We find ourselves a Faithless Looting, which is actually a really good draw. The one thing we don't have going for us right now is actual creatures in the graveyard, and even though the Faithless Looting wasn't the best ever, we do get to put a Mountain and the excess Karizev's Expertise in the graveyard, and get to see a part of this deck which I'm really starting to like, the fact that you can just keep chaining looting effects for maximum deck speed and mana efficiency. From our Tormenting Voice we do find a Desert Celadon, which is going to go a long way next turn to giving us the better board state. Our opponent plays a Phantasmal Image to turn itself into a Thalia, which is really going to give them a very fast clock, and luckily for us we do have the combo in hand. They get in for 8 points of damage, not bad for a turn 3. Meanwhile, I'm reminding myself that I definitely shouldn't be targeting the Phantasmal Image with Karizev's expertise. We find ourselves a hollow one off the top, which is really annoying. It's just about too late, but we might be able to cast it later on in the game. We cycle our Desert Celadon, we find an instant Nenate, which is again really annoying. That could have comboed really well with the hollow one last turn, but for now we just have to carry Zev's expertise, Living End, wipe the board, but bring back some massive creatures for us. Our opponent comically tries to rebuild with Aether Vial and Noble Hierarch, but now that we have a pretty decent hand, plus the biggest 2 creatures on the field, I think outside of a Reflect Mage, our opponent's not really going to be able to do much this game. We find another Insolent Nenate off the top. I put one into play before combat just in case there's anything I'm not thinking of. I might be able to cycle in an emergency. We get in for 11 points of damage, hoping my opponent doesn't block, because then this Lightning Bolt is going to represent a lot of damage. With our opponent not blocking and going down to 6 points of life, we actually put out the Insolent Nenates and not sacrifice them. With our opponent on just 6 life, essentially on 3 with the Lightning Bolt, I'm putting a much higher value on 2 Menace creatures over the hollow one. Our opponent finds an island off the top, puts the Noble Hierarch into play via the Aether Vial, and gets in for what seemed like a very ballsy 2 points of damage. Our opponent does find the Reflector Mage, they do put the Desert Celadon back to our hand, and because I'm apparently a generous fucking idiot, I decide to Lightning Bolt the Reflector Mage rather than go for lethal by Lightning Bolting my opponent's face. I decide not to cycle the Desert Celadon on end step. It will help reduce the cost of Hollow 1 next turn, and to be honest, we've got enough lands that it probably won't matter. We find a Tormenting Voice, which combos pretty well with the basic Mountain, meaning a Hollow 1 will cost a meagre 1 mana at most this turn. We swing with the team, and because I've misused my Lightning Bolt last turn, my opponent's only taking 4 points of damage, leaving them at a tantalisingly close, but worrying 1 life. We cast our Tormenting Voice, pitching the Mountain, drawing essentially 2 more lands, and probably over worrying that my opponent might be able to win next turn. I get rid of an Insolent Nenate, hopefully we can top deck a Bolt. We don't, we find a Living End. We could have also sacrificed the other Insolent Nenate, but to be honest, I don't think my opponent can win from this position. So instead we just go for a rather nice Hollow None. Our opponent finds an Unclaimed Territory off the top, they put themselves down a Mantis Rider, but fortunately for us it's a bit too late, and our opponent concedes with us at 3 life. In sideboarding we bring in 2 Anger of the Gods and an Abrade to hopefully wipe the board. We get rid of a Goblin Dark Dwellers, a Simian Spirit Guide and a Tormenting Voice. Dark Dwellers at 5 mana seems pretty unlikely that we're going to be able to cast it on time, and that's assuming we can even get the Living End into the graveyard. We also decide to not go down the sideboard strategy, instead we're going to keep to the Living End plan since we're going to have to wipe the board to win the game anyway, and a whole bunch of 1/1 tokens, whilst they can chum block for a while, aren't really going to win us the game. Our opening hand in game 2 is pretty much a godlike hand as far as disruption goes. We're going to be able to Anger of the Gods away their early game, and hopefully with no Aether Vial we can Blood Moon them out the game, and hopefully pick off the odd creature with a Lightning Bolt. The downside of our hand is that we don't really have much else going on. We don't have any of our Living End combo, we don't have any creatures that we can really put in the graveyard, nor do we have looting effects, so we are kind of at the mercy of the top of our deck, and we're hoping our opponent doesn't find the Aether Vial. Our opponent leads with a Champion of the Parish, we find ourselves a Mountain. We play our Mountain and pass back to our opponent. We're not looking to Lightning Bolt anything this turn, but if we have to, we will. Our opponent plays Cavern of Souls, followed by a Kitesail Freebooter. We have to Lightning Bolt this in response. We really want to keep the cards in our hand as long as we possibly can, and if we do find a Simian Spirit Guide off the top, we will be able to get the Blood Moon down next turn. Our opponent gets in for 2 measly points of damage and passes back to us. We find that MTGO apparently wants us to be an artist because it keeps on making us draw mountains. We put down Insolent Nenate, which should be able to chum block and hopefully loot away one of these mountains. Our opponent goes straight to combat, we block and sack to find ourselves part 1 of the combo. With a Blood Moon coming down next turn, we're hoping our opponent doesn't have the Aether Vial, nor do they have the ability to grow their Champion of the Parish, then we might be able to stall the game long enough to win. For fuck's sake. We draw our Living End, meaning that if we can get some decent creatures into our graveyard in the next few turns, we've got 2 very good cards to buy us quite a bit of time. We play out our Blood Moon, meaning our opponent is only using Aether Vial to put creatures into play. Me and the opponent get into a new game we like to call Land Go, where I don't want to use my Anger of the Gods just to kill 1 Champion of the Parish, and my opponent understandably doesn't want to put any more creatures into play just to be Anger of the Gods away. We draw Mountains and Living Ends for quite a while. We're storing them now because we can Faithless looting them away or using a Tormenting Voice to pitch them. I was worried I was going to start having to use my Anger of the Gods to kill 1 creature until we finally draw a Abrade. Thank fucking God. This is pretty much the perfect top deck. It now means that our opponent is forced to activate that Aether Vial to get 1 more creature into play, and we can then Anger of Gods the board. Our opponent activates the Aether Vial in response to get that 1 creature down. It turns out to be a Sin Collector, which isn't as bad as it could have been a few turns ago since we now have the combo plus the Anger of the Gods. Our opponent rightfully takes Anger of the Gods since at least if we do use the Living End combo, they'll get their Kitesail Freebooter back. And now, rather than taking much more damage, we go ahead and use Karizev's expertise straight away, use the living end, and with just 2 1-power creatures on the board, we greatly increase our chances of winning this game from here on in. Me and my opponent go for a comical few turns of swinging for 1 and saying go, as we both keep drawing dead. We finally draw a Faithless Looting, which will hopefully help us pull ahead. And whilst the results weren't terrible, it could have gone a lot better. We get in for another point of damage, and now with 2 1/1s with Menace on the field, our opponent probably not likely to cast any more spells and us able to loot for our library if we need to, I feel like we're kind of pulling ahead. Our opponent keeps chipping away for 1 point of damage, and it looks like finally we draw some actual raw power which we can cast and really take over the game. We get in for our obligatory 2 points of damage. We just cast our Hollow One, we don't need to cast a Faithless Looting or anything like that, we can save that for a much worse card next turn. Our opponent valiantly keeps chipping in for that 1 point of damage. We finally draw a Lightning Bolt off the top. We could use it to take out the Kitesail Freebooter, but to be honest I would much rather just keep attacking my opponent. The game ends pretty soon afterwards with our opponent forced to chump block with a Kitesail Freebooter, and we style on them a little bit with some Tormenting Voices followed by extra Hollow Ones, and then a Lightning Bolt to the face to just end this rather drawn out game. Going into my final game, I was joyous. 3-1 from 4 games of Magic, not bad. Then, entering game 5, we get paired against the Budget Magic N-Boss. The Bowser to our Mario. The meme machine, the Lord of the Jank, and general nice guy, Lord Saffron I. Whereas most people would be really happy to play against Saffron, for me it brings back harrowing memories of embarrassment. Sorry about the audio quality.
Is this timely just gain? Timely do nothing?
And that was the last time I played against Saffron Olive. But going into this game, I really want to win. I want to prove that Mono Red Living End isn't just a fluke, and Saffron Olive is a genuinely good player. We keep an incredibly good opening hand. We have the Living End combo, we've got a Lightning Bolt for removal or burn, and we've even got a decent sized creature to put into the graveyard. We're hoping our top decks are generous to us. We play our Mountain, and Saffron plays a Temple Garden tapped. Great start for us. We cycle our Desert Celadon to find a second Karizev's Expertise. Not really the best top deck ever. We untap and draw ourselves another Desert Celadon, so we just ship the turn straight back to Saf. That's 12 power in our graveyard. We're hoping he plays a really bad creature here. And nice guy Saffron follows up with a Lotus Cobra to really help us out. What a nice guy. Sweating like an Eskimo on the equator, I'm really nervous because I could actually take this first game. We have a genuine shot and it's going to be really hard for him to answer. We cycle our Desert Celadon into a Tormenting Voice, which could be great next turn. We draw ourselves a basic land, which is pretty useless, so instead of risking the Tormenting Voice and being blown out by something, we go for the early Karizev's Expertise into Living End, and we say to Saffron, here's a 2-turn clock, what do you got, fella? He untaps, plays a Windswept Heath, and then a Scavenging Ooze. Holy crap, did we ever avoid getting bent over and taken to town there. He cracks Windswept Heath on his own turn and does nothing. I assume this is because he doesn't want to have a window where we can play around his Scavenging Ooze activations. We draw a pretty useless Mountain for our turn, although we can pitch it to the Tormenting Voice anyway. We get in for 12 points of damage, Saffron understandably takes it, and now with a Lightning Bolt and a Karizev's Expertise in our hand, outside of double Path to Exile, I really like our chances of converting this game into a win. After combat, we play one of our lands and pitch the other one to a Tormenting Voice. We draw a Street Wraith and another Tormenting Voice, so not the best top decks ever. We pass the turn back to Saffron Olive in the hope of winning this game 1 next turn. He goes ahead and plays a Noble Hierarch, which at the very least will be a very decent blocker. He then taps out to play a Scavenging Ooze, meaning that we basically have the game 1 now. We can bolt one Scavenging Ooze and steal the other one with a Karizev's Expertise. We cycle a Street Wraith on end step to find a Hollow One. It was actually a mistake of me not to cycle the Street Wraith last turn because there always was the potential that we could have drawn the Hollow One. Even though this game's going really well, I do usually like to look at mistakes that I make to try and improve in the future. We cycle Hollow One to find a Mountain, then we untap and find another Mountain. Thank God this game is won because we would have fallen off pretty badly at this point. We carry Zev's Expertise, the Scavenging Ooze, and even get to use the Tormenting Voice for free. We do still have to pay the additional cost of discarding a card, but that's no problem with Mountains in our hand. We draw into a Faithless Looting and another Mountain, we bolt the Scavenging Ooze, and Saffron concedes. We're halfway there. For this matchup, I wasn't really too sure whether staying with the living end combo or going into the young pyromancer strategy would be better. Saff is playing a lot of cheap creatures. At the same time, he's playing main board Graveyard Hate, and he's obviously going to have more in the sideboard as well. Since we're up a game, I opted to go for the young pyromancer build, hoping that he would slim down the amount of creatures in his deck. And we can always switch back to the living end combo in game 3 should we lose. We take out 2 Carries of Expertise, 2 Insolent Neonates, 2 Simian Spirit Guides, 4 Living Ends, and 1 Tormenting Voice. Going into game 2, I really felt like I should have kept this hand. I think it was a mistake to mulligan this. Sure, we don't have any young pyromancers or hollow ones, but there's a lot of looting there, lands and desert ceradons. We do mulligan down to 6, and this is still a pretty decent starting 6. We put a land to the bottom. We really need to try and avoid hand disruption on turn 1. We need this faithless looting to stick around. And when Seth played a Verdant Catacombs and fetched, my bum ring was pounding like a mother chuffer. Then he played a basic forest, and all of a sudden, life's great. Birds of Paradise, not great, but not bad. We draw another basic mountain, which is kind of annoying, but at the very least, it's fodder for our faithless lootings. We bolt the bird, as I'm trained to always bolt the bird on turn 1 if possible. Saf plays another basic forest, and then puts out a Lotus Cobra. Pretty frustrating, we really need him to not power out an absurd hand early in the game. We draw ourselves a Lightning Bolt. I decide to not bolt the Lotus Cobra. I think we're not winning this game in a long race, and we need to get this hollow one into play as quickly as possible. We just have to hope he can't put out an absurd hand very quickly. We Faithless Looting into a Pyromancer and another Faithless Looting, so now our lands are quite easy fodder to pitch away. With those 2 very good draws, I wasn't too sure what to do. We could Faithless Loot again and maybe hit more hollow ones, but I think with the young Pyromancer in hand now, plus an additional Faithless Looting for next turn, we're hoping to just hit 1 more land, and then we can Faithless Looting and young Pyromancer in the same turn. In retrospect, looking back at it now, I probably should have just lootinged and hoped to hit more hollow ones, and hope that Saffron Olive doesn't have an absurd hand. He plays a Windswept Teeth and cracks it, meaning that had you had the Lotus Cobra out this turn, he would have had about a bazillion mana. He plays a Knight of the Reliquary, which is going to be a huge frickin' problem for us now. I think going off the Living End plan at this point was probably a bad idea. Even with the young Pyromancer draw, I don't think we're going to be able to go wide enough to actually swing through all of his creatures. We play our young Pyromancer, and when Saf Path to Exile's the first one, I really feel like the game's probably over at this point. We're probably just too far behind, and we're not going to be able to generate a quick enough field. And a Gavany Township just further shows that Saffron Olive doesn't really have to do anything. He can just wait for as long as possible. Our land is actually quite a good top deck. It does mean that we can young Pyromancer, Faithless Looting, and potentially cast a hollow one as well this turn. I think for us to have a realistic chance of winning this game from here, we need the looting to hit another looting plus multiple hollow ones. We hit an Abrade and another hollow one, which isn't bad, but it doesn't mean we can get multiple hollow ones out this turn, since we only have 1 red mana. Since we can't cast both hollow ones, I decided to put 1 into the graveyard and just go with the one we have. I think a better move here might have been actually to have put the Mountain and the Abrade in the graveyard and wait till next turn to flash back the Faithless Looting and maybe get another hollow. As it happened, Saf was going to fetch a Bazooka Bog via sacrificing a forest with the Knight of the Reliquary, and at this point the game is pretty much over unless we top deck like an absolute beast. Senior Olive plays a Lotus Cobra and fetches up a Windswept Teeth, which combined with the Lotus Cobra is going to produce about a bazillion mana in this turn. He plays the second Knight of the Reliquary. At this point I'm pretty convinced the game's over. I just want to see as much of his deck as possible, and ideally there's some kind of weird win condition. And let's be honest, it's Saffron Olive, so there's probably going to be some random jank uncommon from Kamigawa block, which we've never heard of. We top deck a Desert Ceradon, which would have been nice if we were able to cast it. We cycle it into another mountain, and I think it's safe to say at this point this game's been a bit of a disaster. Seth fetches and just puts a counter on all of his team. Probably not a very good sign for us, when Seth's using all of his mana to put counters on his creatures. We find a Desert Ceradon which we cycle into a Blood Moon, which would have been nice about 10,000 turns ago, but now it's way too late. And thanks to the Knight of the Reliquaries, Saf's even able to find basics out of his deck anyway. Saffron Olive untaps and then plays a Worship, and to that we say, fuck this, I've had enough. Now that we have seen the Worship, I really want to mix my sideboard up a little bit. I really want to keep in the young Pyromancers because I feel that's going to be quite useful when we're going to try and go wide on the play. The Goblin Bushwhackers will also help, but I also want to bring in some Living Ends so that if we do meet a Worship, we're going to be able to wipe the board and hopefully get in that last point of damage. Maybe with a Lightning Bolt or a Lava Spike. I decided to go down all of the Insolent Neonates, a Desert Ceradon and urabrask, and only bring back in 2 Living Ends. We're using them as more of a board wipe, so we're not fully on that Living End plan, although we do have the option of that. Basically, we're giving up raw speed and power on both of our strategies, and instead we're having a bit more flexibility. So this is the big one. Game 3, we win this one. I'm really impressed with the deck. We lose this one. The deck did okay, but but ultimately failed at the last hurdle. We keep our opening hand, there is a bit of risk involved, we do need to hit lands and we do need more looting effects, but if we do hit those, this hand is incredibly powerful. We play our land, and Saffron reciprocates with a Verdant Catacombs. He gets himself a forest, and then puts down a Birds of Paradise. It's a little bit worrying for us, we don't really want to be drawing lightning bolts, but at the same time we really don't want it to have a Birds of Paradise. We draw ourselves a mountain, so hooray for top decks. We cycle the Street Wraith, and find ourselves a lightning bolt. This turn's gone pretty damn well so far. I did consider just letting Saf have the Birds of Paradise just for one turn and putting down the Young Pyromancer instead, but I think it's just best to get that bird out of here. We can always play the Young Pyromancer next turn and hope that he doesn't have a second Mana Dork. When we see a Noble Hierarch, we're kind of regretting our choices. We top deck a second Hollow One, so all we really need now is a Faithless Looting off the top of our library and we're looking really good. We put down the Young Pyromancer for this turn and give ourselves the best opportunity to get a big wide board and win this game. Saffron Olive cracks his Windswept Teeth and plays a Courser of Crufix. This thing's going to be freaking annoying. It's got 4 toughness and it's always going to take out one of our creatures outside of a Hollow One, should we attack. The Courser resolves to reveal a top deck Fall of the Thran. What the fuck is going on? We untap to find ourselves a nice little Tormenting Voice on top. The only slight problem here is we don't really have anything we want to discard. I guess the Goblin Dark Dwellers is probably the best thing to discard right now. We get a nice token off the Young Pyromancer and give ourselves the best opportunity to get these Hollow Ones into play. Unfortunately we find 2 more Mountains. We play one for the turn and cry like a little bambino. The good news for us is that we do have the Carry Zev's Expertise and the Living End combo in hand, so if we can get these Hollow Ones into our graveyard, we might just be able to get a one-shot on Saffron Olive and steal this game. We attack with the Young Pyromancer hoping he will block, and obviously he's not that stupid. After Saf's draw step he does reveal the Ghost Quarter, which he gets to play for free from the top of his library. Ghost Quarter isn't really a major issue for us, we're almost always going to have mountains in our library. However, one thing that is a big problem is a worship. However, there is some kind of hope for us still. With 7 points of power in our graveyard and 8 points of power in our hand, if we take the next turn to cycle Hollow Ones and we can carry Zev's Expertise and Living End, whilst also keeping creatures off the other side of the board, we might be able to steal this game. We managed to get through 2 points of damage to Saffron, putting him down to 15, so if we can get these Hollow Ones in the graveyard and manage to get that 15 points of damage through next turn, whilst also killing the Birds of Paradise, we can still win this game. This game's really close, and I think it's literally down to whatever Saffron Olive has in his hand and does top deck. Saffron gets in for 3 points of damage of Courser of Crufix and plays himself a Knight of the Reliquary. This is the time we have to go. There was no land from Courser of Crufix, meaning there's no lands in his hand, and we know he's not drawing a land next turn. We cycle both of our Hollow Ones and then step to find nothing but Mounties, but then we untap and find a Lightning Bolt. At this point, the game is very likely won. We can see in his graveyard he has 1 Birds of Paradise. In our graveyard we have 15 points of power plus the flashback Lightning Bolt to kill the Birds of Paradise. Assuming he only plays 1 creature next turn and it doesn't have more than 3 toughness, we can just Lightning Bolt it and swing for lethal. And for some fucking reason, I decide to swing a Young Pyromancer and give him a free Noble Hierarch in his graveyard, meaning that now we have to bolt 2 of his creatures and hope he plays no creatures next turn. We carry Zev's Expertise, followed by Living End. We get the flashback on the bolt to kill the Noble Hierarch. Saffron taps and plays himself another Courser of Crufix and finds a land off the top. At this point, I don't really see how we can win. The 1 point of life game is actually extremely relevant. Our only real hope from here is to get him down to 1 point of life and save the Lightning Bolt after a Living End and hope that that's enough. We fast forward the game here as we just kind of peter out and don't really do much else. We draw a Faithless Looting, which is not a bad top deck. We're getting for our 15 points of damage. We looting, we find a Street Wraith in a land, which is pretty useless. We cycle a Street Wraith into another Faithless Looting. We find a Hollow One, but it's not really going to do anything. And from here, there isn't much more else to see. We never really get another chance to win the game, and Saffron Olive just runs away with it. So GG Saffron Olive, it was a really fun game. If you do want to watch the end of this game from his perspective, go ahead and check out his latest Against the Odds video on the MTG Goldfish channel. Seems like a really good deck he's playing, and yeah, it got us this time, although I do still believe that I could have won this game if I hadn't have messed up. We will just go ahead and skip to the very final turn of the game, where Saffron Olive rather hilariously managed to exile my graveyard when we're both about to return a whole bunch of lands to the battlefield. This first iteration of Mono Red Living End has been a bit of a success. Sure, 3-2 isn't quite the 5-0 I was dreaming of, but what you guys didn't see is that in practice games before I recorded games, I actually went 3-0 against 2 blue-white control decks, which are a big chunk of the meta right now, and 1 Hollow 1 deck. Now it is worth noting, against the blue-white control decks, I didn't actually win any main board games, I only won after sideboarding. But all ifs and buts aside, the deck performed very well, and at the very least is a very good budget alternative to a normal living end deck. I'd really like somebody who knows a bit more about deck building than myself to really pick this up and make it a bit faster and a bit more consistent. There are a few changes I would make to the deck going forward, the first one being possibly adding a second colour. Playing black and having access to Archfiend Vifnir, Horror of the Broken Lands and Fairy Macabre is actually quite a big bonus. On top of that, it would allow us to bring in Collective Brutalities into the sideboard and have some hand disruption and a bit more reach when we can't quite get those last points of damage through to our opponent, as well as being a discard outlet for the hollow ones. I'd possibly try more Dark Dwellers, maybe just one more, and also maybe bring in a couple of Cathartic Reunions instead of 4 Tormenting Voices. We'd probably go down to 2 Tormenting Voices, 2 Cathartic Reunions. I think the Blood Moons could go to the sideboard, they aren't always relevant, sure it wanted to match against humans, but on the whole, not needed. Finally, with sideboarding, while I do love the transformational sideboard, I probably went a little bit too deep and we don't really need those lava spikes, and we can probably trim the Goblin Bushwhackers by just 1 and bring in more specific answers like we discussed before. Maybe some Colligan's Command, some Collective Brutalities, just to have a bit more disruption. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the games. Please like, subscribe, show me some love. Next week I'm going to be playing a deck called Moon Plants. I will leave you guys with a preview clip to keep you interested. Plants. Beautiful plants. Providing us the sustenance we need to live. Providing the air we need to breathe. Providing protection from a zombie horde. That's Plants vs Zombies for those of you who don't know that game. But rather than using plants to defend ourselves, we could just grow and raise our own plants and swarm our opponent and beat them to death. My name's Dan, otherwise known as the Lord of the Plants. I gave myself that name, and this is Moon Plants in Modern.